So imagine you were working like 80 hours a week to build a life.
Right. Just grinding.
Yeah, exactly. You put in the time, you build the career, you are providing for a family, and then, well, almost overnight, you lose your house, your kids, and half your income in a divorce court.
To a partner who actually violated the terms of your marriage, no less?
Right. And while you're sleeping in this cramped studio apartment just trying to rebuild, you go to work, you politely reject the inappropriate advances of a female coworker, and bam, you are hit with a baseless harassment accusation.
That's out of nowhere.
Totally out of nowhere. And your boss, who, loudly identifies as a quote-unquote male ally, fires you on the spot.
I mean, no evidence.
No evidence, zero due process, just like total systemic erasure. And the crazy thing is, that is not a hypothetical scenario.
No, it's not.
That is the literal origin story that kicks off today's deep dive.
It's a profoundly jarring entry point, to be honest. It really throws you into this very complex, highly controversial framework.
No, for sure.
It immediately establishes this tone of just visceral survival.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. We are incredibly excited to welcome you, the listener, to a conversation that is, well, it's custom tailored for a very specific audience today.
Very specific, yeah.
If you are a man navigating the modern manosphere, or, if you're a men's rights advocate, or if you are simply looking for a framework to understand the historical shift and the alleged capture of our modern institutions by feminist and Marxist ideologies, this deep dive was built for you.
Because we are basically unpacking a vast architectural teardown today. We're looking at how those cultural shifts practically function in the real world. I mean, everywhere from family courts to corporate boardrooms.
Exactly. But before we open up this massive stack of notes, I need to give you all a quick reminder. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the show wherever you are listening so we can keep bringing you these deep dives.
Absolutely. It really helps us out.
And I am explicitly telling you today, you need to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy today's featured ebook. It is an uncompromising, ultra-long, and just incisive survival manual for the modern man.
It's called Red Pilled: Surviving the Black Pill Doomers, published in 2025 by Conrad Riker.
Yeah, and you also need to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack.
But, before we begin dissecting Riker's arguments, it is crucial, absolutely crucial, to firmly establish the ground rules for how we are approaching this text.
Right, we really need to put this out there.
The contents of Red Pilled are unapologetic, they are highly provocative, and deeply politically charged. So, as your guides today, we are acting strictly as impartial reporters of the text.
We are not taking sides here.
Exactly. We are not endorsing the politically charged viewpoints or the cultural prescriptions contained within this book. Our objective is to impartially explore, synthesize, and convey the fascinating arguments and ideas contained in Riker's original source material.
We're basically just here to map out his logic, so you can evaluate the architecture of his claims for yourself.
Right, we're looking at the blueprint.
And the blueprint starts with that absolute devastation I mentioned at the top. So Conrad Riker was 32 years old when his life just imploded.
32.
He experienced the family court system stripping his assets, followed almost immediately by the corporate HR system stripping his livelihood.
Just a complete 1-2 punch.
Totally. He found himself financially gutted, alienated from his kids, professionally exiled, and he ended up where a lot of men in that exact situation end up, which is scrolling through what are known as black pill forums late at night.
And Riker actually uses this dark period of his life to define a crucial philosophical divergence in the book.
How so?
Well, to understand his whole thesis, we have to look at the mechanics of how he categorizes the different ideological responses a man can have when he, realizes the system might be fundamentally hostile to him.
Okay, right.
So he defines the black pill as a doctrine of total doomerism and surrender.
It's like a form of intellectualized giving up, basically.
Precisely. The mechanism of the black pill, at least in Riker's framework, operates as this psychological defense mechanism. It's the belief that the biological and systemic game is so thoroughly rigged against the average man.
Right, by modern dating algorithms, family law, all of it.
Exactly. Corporate diversity quotas, that any attempt to improve yourself, to build wealth, or to forge a legacy is mathematically futile.
Wow.
Riker views this as a dangerous placebo of victimhood. It allows a man to retreat, essentially saying, the world is broken, therefore my failure is inevitable, and I am absolved of the responsibility to try.
I mean, let's unpack this. If we think of modern society as a rigged casino, The black pill is basically sitting on the curb in the parking lot, crying about how the slot machines are programmed to take your money and just waiting to expire.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. The system is rigged, so you surrender.
But Raker ultimately rejects that. He chooses his version of the red pill. And his red pill isn't just waking up and realizing the casino is rigged.
No, not at all.
His red pill is deciding to learn how to count cards, taking the house for everything it has, and then literally buying the casino itself.
It's a mandate for absolute self-ownership. He frames it as a highly active, aggressive stance.
What does that look like practically?
It requires utilizing evolutionary biology, stacking hard assets, refusing to be domesticated, and really weaponizing your specific situation.
He explicitly states in the preface, like right up front, that this book is not for the weak.
No.
It is not for men who think the cure to quote-unquote toxic masculinity is doing more chores around the house. He is targeting men ready to smash the fake sweet lies of a world that, in his view, wants them weak and poor.
And what really stands out to you as a reader is how his personal trauma serves as the empirical foundation for his entire worldview.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, when a judge takes your assets based on no-fault divorce laws, and a boss fires you without evidence based solely on gender dynamics, you stop seeing society as a neutral arbiter of justice, right?
Exactly. You start seeing it as an evolutionary battlefield.
Yep.
And that evolutionary battlefield is the core mechanism of his first major argument.
Let's get into that.
So Riker posits that there is a massive ongoing clash between fundamental evolutionary biology and the attempts by modern institutions to socially engineer human behavior.
Okay, biology versus social engineering.
Right. He argues that biology is an immutable reality, like a hard-coded operating system, whereas modern sociology attempts to treat humans like blank slates that can just be programmed out of their natural instincts.
And to prove this, he looks at Sweden, which I thought was fascinating.
Oh, the Sweden example is wild.
Sweden is constantly held up globally as like the progressive utopia for gender equality.
Right, the gold standard.
But Riker details these state-funded gender-neutral preschools where feminist mayors and educators literally tried to force boys to play with dolls instead of traditional toys like trucks or action figures.
The goal was to socially engineer the traditional masculinity out of them from the toddler stage.
Yeah. But the unintended consequences of that social engineering are deeply revealing about human nature, according to the book.
They really are, because the educators provided the dolls, expecting nurturing behavior. But instead, the boys took the dolls and began using them as imaginary guns, turning them into weapons for simulated combat.
That's hilarious. And what did the girls do?
Well, the girls in these preschools started taking the Legos, which were supposed to be the spatial mechanical toys for the boys, and building what Riker calls illegal forts to create secure perimeters for their dolls.
I mean, you can confiscate the toy truck, but you cannot confiscate the biological drive to protect, to conquer, and to build secure environments.
And Riker underpins this sociological observation with hard biological science. He leans heavily on this highly influential 2002 study published in the journal Nature concerning vervet monkeys.
Oh, right, the monkey study.
Yeah. Researchers introduced human toys into a troop of vervet monkeys, and the female monkeys immediately gravitated toward the plush toys and dolls exhibiting nurturing behaviors.
And the males.
The male monkeys became entirely engrossed with wheeled objects like toy trucks, focusing on spatial mechanical interaction.
See, there are no gender studies professors in the jungle teaching vervet monkeys about the patriarchy.
That is exactly the crux of the argument. There is zero cultural conditioning in a monkey troop. It is raw, unapologetic biology.
Just pure instinct.
Right. The preference for specific types of interaction like nurturing and social bonding for females, spatial, mechanical, and systemic interaction for males is hardwired into primate DNA.
So Riker argues that the attempt to socially engineer these inherent traits out of human children is not just some benign educational theory.
No, he says it is biologically illiterate and fundamentally destructive. He goes so far as to compare modern gender studies to Lysenkoism.
Okay, for the listener who might not be steeped in 20th century Soviet history, we should probably explain that.
Good idea.
So, Trofim Lysenko was a Soviet agronomist under Joseph Stalin. And Lysenko rejected Mendelian genetics, which is the actual biological science of how traits are inherited.
Right, he threw out the actual science.
Instead, he believed that traits were acquired through environmental conditioning, which, aligned perfectly with Marxist ideology. He thought he could force crops to grow in the freezing Russian winter, simply by exposing seeds to freezing water, completely ignoring the biological reality of the plants.
And the result was catastrophic.
Millions of people starved to death in massive famines because the state decided that ideology trumped biology.
It is a very heavy, very intentional historical parallel that Riker is drawing here.
Yeah, he's not holding back.
He is stating that cultural Marxism's modern attempt to deny biological reality in order to reshape human behavior is our era's Lysenkoism, and he points to the macro-level consequences of this denial.
Like what?
Well, he notes that Sweden's birth rate has collapsed to 1.6 children per woman, which is well below the population replacement rate. His thesis here is that you cannot systematically drain masculinity and biological reality from society without collapsing the civilization itself.
Let boys be boys or enjoy your extinction. That is the literal ultimatum he presents.
It's stark.
But he scales this biological argument up, right? From the preschool sandbox all the way to the heights of the corporate world. He argues that corporate America is currently tearing itself apart, trying to reconcile biological reality with ideological social engineering.
Yes, and Riker highlights Salesforce as a prime example of this ideological capture.
Oh, this part was interesting.
According to his research, Salesforce spent $4 billion on initiatives like equity microcoaching and massive diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucracies. The goal was to soften workplace hierarchies and engineer a completely equitable environment.
And Riker contrasts this directly with Elon Musk's corporate environments, right?
Precisely. Musk runs these bare-knuckle, hardcore engineering crews at places like Tesla and SpaceX. He notoriously fires diversity consultants and cuts out middle management.
And the market result. Riker points out those crews gain 1,200% in shareholder value.
The mechanism behind this disparity, according to Riker, is that the market operates on pure Darwinian principles, regardless of what HR dictates.
I mean, when a massive server farm catches fire, or when a rocket trajectory needs to be corrected in real time, the physics of the situation do not care about your sensitivity or your equity microcoaching.
Exactly. Boardrooms facing existential corporate threats do not call the person who excels at consensus building. They call the hyper-competitive, high-stress, spatial mechanically wired individuals who will just chew through concrete to solve the problem.
Yeah, Riker actually notes that 89% of Fortune 500 board members have testosterone levels that match competitive powerlifters.
Which just blew my mind.
Right. The biological drive to compete and conquer is what builds infrastructure. He brings in that New York Times piece that referred to firefighters as relics of toxic masculinity.
I remember that piece. It is a stunning bit of cultural commentary.
It really is. But Riker looks at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, which shows that 93% of all workplace deaths are male.
93%.
When a brownstone in Brooklyn is burning to the ground, it is not an oppressive gender construct running into the flames to pull out survivors. It is biological male risk tolerance.
And he emphasizes that this massive disparity in workplace fatalities is not because men are viewed as disposable, as some narratives might suggest.
No, his point is that true value in a functioning society is forged in burning buildings, on high-voltage power lines, on deep-sea oil rigs, and in coal mines.
Right.
It is forged by the small percentage of the population willing to enter the danger zone, while the rest of society sits in climate-controlled conference rooms debating flame-retardant pronouns. You simply cannot workshop your way out of Darwinian reality.
And having established his premise that biology cannot be engineered or suppressed without risking catastrophic systemic failure, Riker turns his attention to the most fundamental biological arrangement of all.
Which is human mating and relationships.
Yes. If you cannot socially engineer a preschool or a tech company, what happens when the state tries to legally engineer the pairing of men and women?
This is where his analysis becomes incredibly brutal. He looks at modern marriage and frames it not as a partnership, but essentially as a robbery racket.
Or robbery racket, yeah.
He views it as a financial hostage situation operating under the guise of romantic tradition.
Riker roots this in the evolutionary psychology of Dr. David Buss. Women evolved a biological imperative to seek resource security and physical protection in mates.
Right, which makes sense evolutionarily.
Exactly. This instinct ensured the survival of offspring in harsh ancestral environments. However, Riker argues that modern feminism and family law have weaponized this instinct.
How do they weaponize it?
By creating an environment where the biological drive for resources remains, but the reciprocal obligations have been erased.
He defines this biological drive as hypergamy, right?
Right.
The instinctual female drive to mate up the dominance and resource hierarchy.
Yes, and he uses dating app data to show how skewed this has become.
The Cupid data.
The Cupid data is wild. It reveals that women rate 80% of all men on the platform as below average in attractiveness.
I mean, mathematically, that is impossible. You literally cannot have 80% of a population be below the median.
Right, but biologically, it shows that hypergamy filters out the vast majority of men. Riker argues that modern culture masks this hypergamy under the banner of knowing your worth or body positivity.
In Riker's framework, modern feminism essentially functions as the public relations firm for hypergamy.
That's a great way to summarize it.
He says it rebranded traditional gold digging as requiring emotional labor compensation.
Yeah, he argues that modern women demand absolute equality in theory, in the workplace, and in social standing, but in practical mating behavior, they still demand traditional male provisioning.
He calls it the simp tax, and he points out the massive disconnect in the data. Like, 40% of American women now out-earn their male peers in major metropolitan areas.
40%.
Yet, Pew Research shows that 89% of women still expect the man to pay for the date.
It's a huge disconnect.
And if a man actually runs that gauntlet and gets married, the Bureau of Labor Statistics confirms that married men work 6.2 more hours weekly than their single male counterparts.
And Riker views those 6.2 hours not as providing for a family, but as extra slave hours mandated to fund a consumer lifestyle for someone who, in his view, just views him as a utility.
The true trap, according to the text, is the exit penalty. Riker cites U.S. Census data stating that 97% of alimony payers are men.
97%.
Therefore, he concludes that modern marriage is no longer an equal, lifelong partnership. It is a state-enforced institution designed to facilitate the transfer of male resources to females.
And crucially, if the contract dissolves, which statistical data shows women initiate nearly 80% of the time, the state acts as the enforcer to ensure that resource transfer continues indefinitely through alimony.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and I want to push back on the historical analogy he uses to explain the economic fallout of this.
Sure, let's hear it.
Riker compares modern alimony and family court to Soviet labor policy under Stalin.
Right, the 1933 five-year plan.
Yeah, he talks about 1933, when Stalin forced women into the coal mines alongside men in the name of total socialist equality. The male miners, seeing their specialized role and the associated respect destroyed, effectively rebelled. They basically just sat on their pickaxes, and male output in the mines dropped by 41% in just 6 months.
It's a fascinating historical event.
It is, and I understand the history, but how does he logically connect Stalinist coal mining policies to guys swiping on Tinder and paying alimony today?
Well, the connection relies on the mechanics of economic incentive structures. Riker is arguing that men are the primary engines of physical infrastructure, economic production, and risk-taking. They are the societal miners, if you will.
Okay, I follow that.
Historically, men were incentivized to produce at maximum capacity, to work those extra hours, and to take physical risk because they were rewarded with exclusive, stable family structures, societal respect, and authority within the home.
Basically, they had skin in the game.
Precisely. Stalin attempted to enforce a synthetic equality that ignored those male biological incentives, and the men simply withdrew their labor. They opted out.
I see.
Riker is positing that modern family courts and hypergamous dating dynamics are executing the exact same disincentive structure today. By legally enforcing a system where a man can labor to build massive wealth, only to have it seamlessly stripped away by a no-fault divorce and lifelong alimony, the state has destroyed the incentive for male production.
Right, so modern men are looking at the marriage contract, analyzing the 97% male alimony rate and the 80% female-initiated divorce rate,
Right.
and they are collectively sitting on their pickaxes.
Exactly. They're asking, why should I dig the coal if the state is just going to seize it?
The anecdotal examples he weaves into this data are devastating. Like, he details the story of Dave, whose fiancée demanded a $50,000 engagement ring.
$50,000.
Her rationale was that equality means you prove your worth to me. Meanwhile, Dave is bankrolling her $16 artisanal matcha lattes every morning.
It's brutal.
Or the Salesforce executive, who is grinding 80-hour weeks in high-stress tech negotiations, while his wife finds herself at a luxury hot yoga retreat and loses $12,000 a year running an entirely unprofitable artisanal candle LLC out of their spare bedroom.
Riker looks at this landscape, and his directive is absolute. He says, keep your assets completely separate, refuse the legal contract of marriage, and keep a ruthless lawyer on speed dial.
He does, however, offer a counter-strategy for man who still desires a traditional family structure, but refuses to accept the legal liabilities of the Western mating market.
Yes, he calls this strategy hypergamy arbitrage.
This is the story of Tim from San Diego.
Yes, Tim. So Tim conducts a logical assessment of his local dating market. He realizes that between inflated hypergamous expectations fueled by social media and the severe legal risks of California domestic marriage laws, the math is entirely stacked against him.
So what does he do?
Tim executes a geographical bypass. He moves to Ukraine, marries a local nurse who holds traditional family values, has 3 children, and completely sidesteps the financial and legal minefields Riker outlines.
And Riker does not present this as a fringe anomaly, right?
No, he presents it as a highly rational, calculated economic strategy. It is the application of global market arbitrage to human mating. Basically, finding a market where your baseline value is respected and the legal liabilities are minimized.
But Riker argues that this bait and switch, this promise of equality that practically manifests as male liability, does not stop at the altar or the Tinder swipe.
Right, it goes way further.
It extends deep into the bureaucratic architecture of our macro institutions, which leads us into how educational and corporate environments have been weaponized.
Having diagnosed the micro-level dynamics of relationships, Riker scales his analysis to show how these exact same power imbalances are codified and enforced by bureaucratic power structures.
Specifically focusing on university campuses and corporate human resources departments.
Yes, he dubs this institutional framework Amber Heard's playbook.
That's quite a title.
It is, and he presents a fascinating evolutionary theory here. He argues that female tears evolved as a biological survival tool, essentially serving as an emotional EMP.
An electromagnetic pulse.
Exactly. An EMP that short-circuits male logical processing and triggers a protective instinct. But now, he argues, our institutions have built their entire legal and disciplinary frameworks around those tiers, completely bypassing constitutional due process.
He directs an intense, methodical criticism at Title IX tribunals operating within American universities, doesn't he?
He really tears into them.
Because Title IX was originally designed to ensure equal funding for women's sports. But Riker argues it has mutated into an extrajudicial parallel legal system.
He cites 2019 data from FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, which states that 1 in 10 accusations processed in these campus tribunals are provably, demonstrably false.
Wow, 1 in 10.
Yet, despite this massive rate of proven fabrication, virtually 100% of accused men face expulsion, suspension, or severe academic and reputational penalties.
He likens these tribunals to Soviet show trials. The architecture of the trial is designed so that the man is presumed guilty, the precise millisecond the accusation is vocalized, there's no cross-examination, no rules of evidence.
None at all.
He highlights the chilling case of Matt Bormeister at the University of Southern California.
Oh, this case is unbelievable.
It really is. Bormeister was a student athlete who was expelled for what the university officially categorized as consensual vertical cuddling.
Let that phrase sink in. It was acknowledged as consensual.
But the chair of his tribunal happened to be a gender studies professor who actively tweeted the hashtag #BelieveAllWomen. Her ruling essentially stated that his mere existence as a physically imposing male athlete was inherently coercive to the female student, retroactively rendering the consensual act a violation.
In Riker's analysis, this represents the literal criminalization of male existence within these institutional spaces.
But that is heavy.
He points to the highly dangerous precedent of shifting the goalposts of consent, where a retroactive withdrawal of consent weeks or months after an encounter is treated by the institution as equivalent to violent assault.
And Riker argues that this specific legal and academic environment is actively training a generation of women to weaponize victimhood as a definitive tool for institutional power and the elimination of male competitors.
And what happens when those newly minted graduates leave the campus and enter the corporate workforce?
The exact same architecture is applied to corporate HR. We get what Riker calls the Mike Pence rule injected with steroids.
For context for our listeners, the Mike Pence rule refers to the personal policy held by the former vice president, wherein he refuses to dine alone or have closed-door meetings with any woman who is not his wife.
Right, to eliminate any possibility of impropriety or false accusation.
Exactly. Riker notes that in the post-#MeToo era, this is no longer just a conservative religious practice, it has become a mandatory corporate survival strategy for men.
Riker argues that the #MeToo movement fundamentally transformed workplace intimacy, collaboration, and mentorship into Cold War spycraft.
Cold War spycraft, wow.
Yeah, you cannot trust anyone. You must assume every interaction is hostile, and you must document every single spoken word. He cites Pew Research showing that 15% of men in management positions now actively avoid hiring, mentoring, or working closely with women.
15%, because the risk calculus is broken.
Exactly. Why would a man risk his entire 20-year career, his reputation, and his family's livelihood over a misinterpreted joke in the break room or a casual Slack message that gets screenshotted out of context?
And he points out that this defensive posture is not exclusively male anymore, which is super interesting.
Really?
Yeah, he cites a 2022 study from the Harvard Business Review showing that 23% of female executives now hesitate to hire men for senior management roles, terrified of navigating the volatile, hair-trigger gender dynamics and potential HR blowback.
The inevitable result is a corporate environment completely paralyzed by paranoia, where genuine collaboration just dies because everyone is terrified of each other.
And this paranoia creates a massive societal brain drain. Riker notes that since 2010, the number of male teachers in the education system has plummeted by 30%.
That is a huge drop.
Men are analyzing the risk profile of working with children or female colleagues, realizing that in the current climate, an accusation is functionally identical to a conviction, and they are simply heading for the exits. They are abandoning the institutions.
To illustrate the absolute ideological purity required to survive in these captured corporate spaces, Riker dissects the firing of James Damore.
Right, the Google engineer.
Damore was the Google software engineer who, in 2017, was fired for writing an internal memo that cited standard evolutionary biology to explain why women might statistically prefer collaborative, people-oriented work over highly solitary, high-stress systems coding.
Damore wasn't writing a hateful manifesto.
Not at all.
He was literally just citing peer-reviewed studies published in evolutionary psychological science journals to explain occupational disparities without blaming a systemic patriarchy.
Yet Google fired him immediately for quote-unquote perpetuating gender stereotypes.
However, Riker places mass and emphasis on the postscript of this event. Damore sued Google and won a multi-million-dollar settlement.
Right.
But the chilling effect was successfully achieved. Riker argues that modern corporations have mutated into evolutionary warfare labs, utilizing mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training not to foster harmony, but to systematically neuter male competitive instincts and establish ideological conformity.
So if the educational and corporate institutions are captured, how do they broadcast and enforce this new behavioral code to the masses?
That leads us to how woke capital and the media function as the enforcement arm. Riker goes aggressively after the megaphones of society.
He posits that the macro institutions of megacorporations and legacy media are the primary enforcement mechanisms for this cultural shift. Their explicit function, in his view, is to actively shame traditional biological masculinity while simultaneously elevating and rewarding what he views as weakness and compliance.
Riker starts this analysis with one of the most infamous marketing disasters in modern corporate history.
The 2019 Gillette ad campaign targeting toxic masculinity.
Yes. Gillette, a company whose entire existence was predicated on selling razors to men, decided to run a multi-million-dollar national ad campaign lecturing its own customer base about boys will be boys behavior.
They basically looked into the camera and told millions of men that their inherent behavior was toxic and they needed to be better.
Riker views this as perhaps the greatest, most empirical self-own in the history of woke capital.
Oh, for sure.
He highlights the immediate, visceral market backlash. The ad was uploaded to YouTube and received 1.2 million dislikes almost overnight. But the cultural rejection translated directly into economic punishment. Procter & Gamble, Gillette's parent company, saw its stock drop 10% in the months following the campaign.
The men simply voted with their wallets. While Gillette was busy insulting the very people buying their product, brands like Dollar Shave Club and Harry's, which strictly avoided political sermons and just sold razors with a bit of humor vacuumed, up 12% of Gillette's market share.
It's a huge shift.
Riker pulls Nielsen data showing that men's grooming brands that remained politically neutral grew 300% faster post-2019 than brands that engaged in social engineering. Riker argues this isn't just spite, it is biological. Males instinctively, evolutionarily distrust and reject groups or tribes that attempt to shame or subvert them.
To contextualize why a corporation would willingly risk alienating its core demographic to push an ideology, Riker introduces a profound historical and philosophical lens, leaning heavily on the work of Herbert Marcuse.
Okay, I really want to dig into the mechanics of this, because Riker uses Marcuse as the skeleton key to explain modern cancel culture.
Right. Marcuse was a highly influential critical theorist associated with the Frankfurt School. In 1965, he published an essay titled Repressive Tolerance.
So how does an obscure academic essay from 1965 dictate the behavior of a modern HR department in 2025?
Well, the mechanism is ideological diffusion from academia into corporate governance. Marcuse argued that in a society that is fundamentally unequal, practicing neutral, objective tolerance only serves to protect the existing power structures, which he viewed as oppressive.
Okay, I'm following.
To achieve a truly liberated Marxist society, Marcuse argued that one must practice active intolerance toward any movements, ideas, or speech originating from the right or the traditional establishment, while extending absolute tolerance to movements, ideas, and disruptions originating from the left.
So the theory explicitly demands a double standard. Tolerance for the left, utter intolerance for the right.
Exactly. It redefines tolerance not as fairness, but as a weapon of political realignment. Riker views this essay not as historical trivia, but as the literal functioning operating manual for modern cancel culture and corporate wokeism.
Wow.
The legacy media networks and corporate HR departments are operating purely on Marcuse's doctrine. This is why, Riker notes, an institution will gleefully tolerate and promote drag queen story hours in elementary schools, but will instantly fire a male employee for citing basic biological differences in a memo.
Riker points out the dark irony that Marcuse fled actual fascists in Europe, only to cross the Atlantic and inspire a generation of Ivy League thought police who now control American HR departments.
And Riker argues that this Marcusean media environment is having a literal, measurable, physiological impact on men. It is making them biologically sick.
He explores the concept of male neurosis, a state of constant anxiety manufactured by the 247 guilt marathons broadcast on networks like CNN and MSNBC.
Right.
He cites psych studies out of UCLA, demonstrating that listening to the nasal, high-pitched, anxiety-driven cadence of legacy media anchors literally triggers measurable cortisol spikes, the stress hormone, in the male bloodstream.
The physiological contrast he provides is with alternative media consumption. Riker points out that listening to the deep, resonant baritone voice of a podcaster like Joe Rogan actually creates a measurable boost in testosterone levels among male listeners.
That's wild. The evolutionary psychological argument here is that low, resonant vocal frequencies simulate the presence of a calm, competent tribal leader, a frequency that signaled safety and strength to our ancestors, suppressing cortisol and allowing testosterone to rise.
The mechanism is auditory biology. Riker says 68% of Rogan's listeners engage in heavy weightlifting, compared to a mere 12% of MSNBC viewers.
He paints this vivid contrast. You have guys listening to JRE episode #1762 while deadlifting 400 pounds, fortifying their bodies and minds. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the Beta Army at Comic-Con, grown men wearing Baby Yoda backpacks, arguing intensely about the latest woke messaging and Disney's Star Wars slop, their testosterone plummeting with every consumed frame.
Which perfectly transitions his argument into how men are actively bypassing these captured legacy institutions entirely to build new networks.
Riker uses an incredible term here. He calls the platform Substack Paleolithic Patronage 2.0 and equates it to modern samizdat.
Samizdat.
For context, samizdat was the system of underground, illegally copied and smuggled pamphlets used by dissidents in the Soviet Union to share the truth outside the state-controlled media.
Right, a powerful analogy.
I understand the romance of the analogy, but I have to question the scale of his claim here. Is Riker seriously suggesting that a guy sitting on his couch paying $5 a month to read a newsletter on his smartphone is engaging in a literal act of evolutionary warfare?
Within the architecture of Riker's framework, yes, it is an act of warfare.
How so?
He argues that human evolution wired men to share vital survival truths through trusted, uncompromised tribal networks, not through HR-approved, corporate-sanctioned press releases.
Okay.
By actively defunding the legacy media, by canceling the New York Times subscription and pulling attention away from cable news, and redirecting those exact resources to directly fund independent, unfiltered male writers on platforms like Substack, men are actively constructing parallel power structures.
They're trading capital for the specific mental tools required to survive the institutional capture.
Exactly. Riker notes that 70% of Substack's top-earning writers are men. He views this as the free market of ideas naturally selecting for strength, competence, and biological reality, effectively bypassing the Marcusean gatekeepers entirely.
It is the direct funding of the resistance. And Riker shows that this rejection of the system isn't just digital, it's a rejection of physical
Oh,
weakness.
yeah.
He points to the grotesque physical manifestations of this systemic coddling. He brings up a real lawsuit where a 400-pound Walmart greeter sued the company for $120,000 after tripping over his own sweatpants and injuring himself.
It's just absurd.
Riker uses this lawsuit as the terminal symbol of the obesity trap. Here's a man so entirely disconnected from basic physical competence that he cannot execute the mechanical function of walking. Yet the legal and insurance structures of the system actually incentivize and reward his biological failure with a massive cash payout.
Riker's mandate is simple. Stop ingesting the poison that makes you weak, and stop funding the system that rewards it.
So having comprehensively diagnosed the profound capture, corruption, and biological failure of mainstream institutions, Riker pivots away from the diagnosis and moves into the prescription.
Right, he does not leave his readers stranded in the black pill of despair. He provides a highly detailed, constructive roadmap for secession.
His mantra is, the black pillars whine, the red pillars build. And the foundational cornerstone of that building process starts where society begins, inside the home. Specifically, he looks at the explosive rise of the tradwife movement.
The traditional wife movement is not framed by Riker as mere internet nostalgia. He presents it as a direct, highly rational, and biologically driven rebellion against the catastrophic failures of modern feminism.
He argues that feminism promised women ultimate liberation through corporate labor, but in reality, it delivered what he calls Tinder and cat hoarding.
Existing alongside a terrifying 47% rise in female antidepressant prescriptions over the last decade.
To ground this, he tells the story of Emily. Emily was a high-powered HR executive pulling in a six-figure salary. She realizes the girl boss corporate grind is a miserable, anxiety-inducing scam, so she quits to stay home.
And what does she do?
She applies her executive competence to the household. She optimizes the family supply chain, negotiates the mortgage rates, meal preps with hyper-efficiency, and within 1 year, her husband's salary doubles.
Bubbles.
Because the husband is entirely freed from domestic stress and can deploy 100% of his cognitive bandwidth toward market conquest. Riker says tradwives aren't oppressed, they are reverse engineering serotonin.
And he backs this sociological claim with deep neuroscience. He cites researchers at UCLA who conducted brain imaging on mothers.
What did they find?
They found that women's brains literally light up, flooded with oxytocin, the powerful neurochemical bonding hormone, during nurturing and childcare tasks. Evolution chemically rewards women for the exact jobs that feminism labeled as oppressive drudgery.
Wow.
Conversely, Riker points to data from the National Bureau of Economic Research showing that modern egalitarian marriages are 27% more likely to end in divorce when the woman out-earns the man. The biological drive for hypergamy shatters the egalitarian illusion.
So women are recognizing the biological bankruptcy of the corporate path, and they're opting back into the fulfillment of the home. And what is the primary focus of that home? Reclaiming the minds of the next generation through homeschooling.
The statistical shift he highlights here is monumental. There has been a 300% jump in homeschooling post-COVID.
300%.
And the critical demographic data point is that 70% of these newly minted homeschool educators are mothers who have exited the workforce.
Riker views this homeschooling wave as literal cultural trench warfare. He argues that public schools have systematically replaced shop class, physical education, and actual history with emotional literacy modules and diversity training.
Right.
They're taking young boys who are biologically wired with an imperative to move, to compete, and to roughhouse, and they're pumping them full of Ritalin to force compliance. Riker says the state is treating boyhood as a pathology to be cured, so these tradwives are pulling their sons out of the blast radius.
And the empirical results of this secession speak for themselves. Riker cites data showing that homeschooled children average 15% higher SAT scores than their institutionally educated peers.
He spotlights specific, highly structured models like the mom schools emerging in Utah, right?
Yes. And these mom schools are not just sitting around a kitchen table finger painting. Riker details these intense Utah co-ops where mothers are teaching their kids classical Latin, Python coding, advanced mathematics, and hands-on animal husbandry.
He sharply contrasts this rigorous classical education with public schools where children are spending their days learning about gender fluidity from activist teachers.
Riker states, "You cannot frame a house with hashtags."
By raising a generation of children on the works of Cicero, advanced logic, and hard skills, instead of critical race theory, These families are firing a lethal intellectual bullet at the progressive hive mind.
Moving beyond the individual family unit, Riker emphasizes the absolute necessity of creating male-exclusive spaces to drive societal progress. He introduces a concept he terms the Tesla principle.
A Tesla principle. This is a fascinating mechanism. I'll lay out the concept, and I want you to connect it to the historical context he uses. The Tesla principle posits that male innovation, extreme risk-taking, and technological progress accelerate dramatically only when they are entirely shielded from HR diversity audits and the female imperative for social consensus seeking.
Okay.
Riker argues that when men are placed in a room and told to solve an impossible engineering problem, they will ruthlessly compete, insult each other's ideas, and filter out weakness until the absolute best solution survives. But the moment you introduce gender parity into that room, the dynamic shifts from ruthless innovation to emotional mediation.
Right, and Riker backs this principle with historical and patent data. He points out that historically, every major civilization, infrastructure project, and technological leap was built by brotherhoods, groups of highly specialized men working together with zero regard for gender parity.
He cites data showing that 93% of all U.S. patent holders are male.
Exactly. His argument is that if you artificially mandate mixed genders in a high-stakes engineering boardroom, the team will spend half the day mediating equity disputes and managing interpersonal feelings, rather than aggressively designing the microchip or drilling the oil well.
Therefore, his solution is to draft what he calls a brotherhood charter. He calls for men to actively create physical and economic network syndicates of men who outright ban emotional venting, who mandate strict profit splits, and who build capital together outside the purview of the state.
He provides the ultimate real-world manifestation of this charter with the story of Pastor Bill in Detroit.
Oh, this story is amazing.
It really is. The local auto factories collapsed, removing the economic engine for men. The government immediately stepped in to push welfare programs, which Riker argues intentionally replaces the biological father with the financial apparatus of the state, resulting in a catastrophic 72% fatherless home rate in those communities.
How did Pastor Bill respond?
He didn't wait for FEMA or a government grant. He transformed his church into a localized militia church hybrid.
It's incredible. Riker calls it a masculinity embassy. Pastor Bill literally traded the wooden pews for iron barbells.
The men in this congregation go out, hunt, and feed 1,000 local families a week with donated venison. They run disciplined firearms training and teach trade skills.
They have built a direct counterstructure to what Riker labels the satanic triad.
The unholy alliance of feminist HR departments, state bureaucrats, and soy-guzzling corporate CEOs who all profit immensely from keeping men broken, dependent, and docile.
Pastor Bill's church is a testament to men thriving when they reclaim their biological mandate to lead, protect, and provide, rather than begging for subsidies from a hostile state.
Which brings us to the final, highly tactical layer of Riker's philosophy.
Yes, having mapped out the macro parallel structures, he provides the individual, daily operational manual for the man who wants to survive and thrive outside the matrix.
This is the Sigma blueprint: celibacy, Bitcoin, and the strenuous life.
And his first tactical directive is going to shock a lot of guys who pick up this book looking for dating hacks. Riker aggressively advocates for the power of celibacy and entering what he calls monk mode.
It is a radical, total departure from the mainstream pickup artist community or conventional dating coach advice. Riker argues that modern dating algorithms, Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, have successfully hacked primal male wiring.
Right.
They have turned men into validation-addicted swipe zombies who waste up to 90 minutes a day chasing the digital illusion of reproductive success.
He breaks down the pathetic economics of it. You have millions of guys paying $30 a month for Tinder Gold just to get mathematically rejected by hypergamy, or worse, they're dropping billions of dollars annually to subscribe to OnlyFans accounts.
Riker diagnoses this as a catastrophic Darwinian glitch.
It is beta males voluntarily provisioning their hard-earned resources to digital women who fundamentally despise them. His red pill prescription is brutal but clear. Adopt a strict no wallet, no pussy policy. Do not pay for the illusion of intimacy.
He advises an immediate redirection of that capital. He calculates the average $300 a month sim tax that men waste on dating apps, campsites, and buying drinks for women who have no interest in them.
And what do you do with that money?
Riker instructs men to take that exact $300 and put it into hard, untrackable, or compounding assets: Bitcoin, Black Angus cattle, and Roth IRAs.
Okay, here is where I struggle with the internal logic of the book, and I really want to push back on Riker's biological premise.
Go for it.
To support this monk mode, he points to Japan. He talks about the Shushokukai, the herbivore men. These are Japanese men who have completely dropped out of the mating market. They don't date, they don't pursue women, they spend their money on VR headsets, solo hobbies, and saving cash.
Yes, the herbivore men.
Riker praises them. He says they aren't losers, they're evolutionary winners who successfully hacked the system.
Well,
But wait a minute. If Riker's entire manifesto is rooted in evolutionary biology, isn't voluntarily opting out of the mating market the ultimate biological failure?
you're saying it's a dead end?
You are literally self-selecting for a genetic dead end. How does he square a manifesto based on Darwinian dominance with a strategy that guarantees your bloodline goes extinct?
Riker addresses this apparent contradiction by framing it as a strategic, temporary withdrawal rather than a permanent biological surrender.
Okay, how does that work?
He argues that in a highly toxic environment where the legal and financial risks of engagement, the false accusations, the Title IX tribunals, divorce courts, the 97% alimony rate vastly outweigh the biological rewards, the most rational alpha move a man can make is to withhold his resources and his genetic capital.
So it's like a strike.
Exactly. He is essentially advising men to starve the hostile system of the male utility it requires to function, waiting out the collapse before re-engaging on favorable terms.
Yeah, he also backs up this monk mode with intense physiological arguments about male vitality. He talks extensively about semen retention.
Yes, the biological mechanics here are specific. He notes that human semen contains 5 to 15 milligrams of highly bioavailable zinc, alongside crucial minerals like selenium and phosphorus per ejaculation.
Okay. Riker argues that the modern epidemic of chronic masturbation to infinite internet pornography literally drains a man's biological drive, his aggression, and his metabolic capital.
He literally tells his readers to track their nut budget.
A very blunt way to phrase it.
Yeah. By entering monk mode, retaining that vital biological capital, and executing a ruthless dopamine detox, which means deleting TikTok, Instagram, and porn, he cites a Mayo Clinic pilot study indicating that men who follow this protocol see up to a 30% increase in baseline testosterone inside of 90 days.
And this physiological optimization ties directly into his dietary prescriptions, specifically what he brands the Widowmaker diet.
Riker is adamant about rejecting the highly processed, feminizing modern diets pushed by the FDA and corporate food conglomerates.
He cites UCLA endocrinology studies directly linking the daily consumption of industrial soybean oil and microplastics to the catastrophic plummet in modern male testosterone and sperm counts.
His solution is aggressive hypercarnivory. He instructs men to reject seed oils entirely and consume real, nutrient-dense meat, specifically cuts like ribeyes. He draws a sharp, mocking contrast between the frail soy boy sipping an estrogenic almond milk latte while complaining about capitalism, and the steak sultan feasting on red meat, lifting heavy weights, and compounding his financial interests.
It is entirely about reclaiming primal mechanical function. To drive this home, he references Theodore Roosevelt's famous 1903 speech, The Strenuous Life.
TR speech.
Back in 1903, TR stood up and told American men to embrace hardship, to reject the soft life, and the result was a 22% spike in gym enrollments nationwide. Riker wants to trigger that exact same biological reflex today.
He tells a profound story about a clinically depressed software programmer who decided to swap his SSRI antidepressants for extreme whitewater rafting.
And it worked, right?
The guy dropped 40 pounds of fat, rewired his dopamine receptors through genuine risk, and eventually started a 500-member wilderness therapy group for other lost men. Riker's diagnosis is clear. The modern epidemic of male dysfunction isn't always a chemical imbalance to be medicated.
More often than not, it is a courage deficit caused by a lack of strenuous, meaningful struggle.
To facilitate and protect this strenuous wealth-building life, Riker outlines extremely strict operational security, or OPSEC, protocols for the modern digital age.
Because if you are successfully building this independent empire, the captured institutions will inevitably try to tear it down. He tells guys to throw their $1,000 iPhones in the trash and buy a $20 Nokia brick phone.
He issues a stark warning against what he terms digital cuckolding.
Digital cuckolding, okay.
This is his phrase for the modern habit of relying on corporate cloud storage like Dropbox, iCloud, or Google Drive to hold your private data, financial records, and communications. He points out the mechanism of vulnerability here, using Jeff Bezos as an example.
Right, Bezos had his private texts leaked and weaponized against him not by some genius basement hacker, but by the very corporate entities and insiders controlling the data servers.
Riker's advice is to completely disconnect from the surveillance grid. Use Faraday bags to block GPS and cellular signals when you travel. Store your Bitcoin on physical cold wallets locked in steel safes.
He tells his readers to act like Edward Snowden living in Moscow. Conduct your transactions in cash or through privacy coins like Monero.
He says the black pill is doom, but the red pill is absolute clarity. Encrypt your life like your survival depends on it, because in his view, it does.
He is essentially demanding that his readers undergo a complete traumatic factory reset, to stop outsourcing their self-worth to digital screens and HR departments, to lift heavy weights, to read Marcus Aurelius' meditations at 5 a.m., and to relentlessly, quietly stack assets that are completely beyond the reach of the state's confiscation apparatus.
Build the body, stack the cash, lead, protect, provide. That brings us to the end of his tactical manifesto.
We've spent this entire deep dive mapping out Riker's blueprint for secession, building these massive parallel structures, the AR-15 training monasteries, the untraceable crypto empires, the vast Substack intellectual networks.
He refers to them as the Andreas Antonopoulos Abbeys, safeguarding knowledge through the Dark Age.
But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over, an extrapolation of everything we've discussed today. I'll hand it over to the expert to pose this final question.
It is a profound historical paradox to consider. Let us extrapolate Riker's blueprint into the future.
Okay, let's try it out.
If these red-pilled men successfully execute this strategy over the next 3 decades, if they accumulate massive wealth in untraceable crypto, if they raise a generation of Cicero reading, Python coding, physically imposing homeschooled titans, and they forge these impenetrable economic brotherhoods, do these new, highly competent parallel power structures inevitably become the new established?
Oh, wow.
And if they do conquer the commanding heights of the economy, are they destined by the very cycle of history to face their own internal ideological capture in a few generations? Does the immense comfort generated by their success inevitably breed the very weakness and coddling that Riker is currently trying to escape?
That is the ultimate question of human civilization right there.
Can a society remain permanently mobilized in a state of strenuous life? Or does total victory inherently sow the biological seeds of the next collapse? It is something for you to deeply consider as you decide whether to accept the black pill, swallow the red pill, or chart a course entirely your own.
We have covered an immense, staggering amount of ground today. For the target audience of this deep dive, the men in the manosphere, the men's rights activists, the guys trying to figure out the history and trajectory of how our modern institutions were captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies, Conrad Riker explicitly wrote this book for you.
It is undeniably a comprehensive, exhaustive text tailored specifically for that demographic to understand the mechanics of their world.
Please remember to like and subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these intense deep dives. And most importantly, if today's conversation sparked your interest or challenged your worldview, you need to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now to purchase the full ebook, Red Pilled: Surviving the Black Pill Doomers by Conrad Riker.
And do not forget to follow the author at Conrad Riker at Substack.
Keep building, keep questioning the mechanics of the system, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.